All I'm trying to say here is that once you find the Philosopher's Stone, the ocean, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And what seems like the end of the greatest mystery is just the beginning of an even greater one. And if you found this video and this channel, I don't know how we all got here, but we have become a part of the search for the Holy Grail, the true Holy Grail spoken of by all the great initiates and alchemists of the past. Transmutation, time dilation, production of energy, these are all just the signposts that we find along the way, along the journey. So please help share what I've shared today. The entire world needs to take up this search for the Grail, like their lives depend on it, because they do. Stay tuned to hear more things that you probably won't hear many places else. This is Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan Colin, and a special thanks to Malcolm Bendall, Dr. Robert Haralick, and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, all of whom I have referenced. Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan Colin, an independent researcher, an alchemist, and a student of the inventor and vortex fusion specialist Malcolm Bendall. We're continuing with our Alpha and Omega Ladder series of lectures, interviews, and announcements today. This is technically part 6, but if you haven't seen the previous videos in the series, don't worry. They can be viewed standalone or in any order, and this one is a good starting point. In this part, I'm going to give my own synthesized breakdown of Malcolm Bendall's Alpha and Omega Ladder diagram and Dr. Robert Haralick's accompanying theory, which details the stepwise process of atomic fusion or transmutation of the elements. I will also be taking another look at the analysis of the thunderstorm generator spheres conducted by Bob Greenyer of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project back in 2023, and we'll see how this relates to all of the new developments. In this video, I have aimed to strip everything that Robert and Malcolm are presenting back to minimalistic simplicity, so that it can be most easily understood by most people. And I've done my best to maintain accuracy, but I'm also the student here, so please forgive any minor errors or compromises that I make for the sake of making this more digestible for the general public. You can of course go back and watch the first 5 parts of our Alpha and Omega Ladder series, in which Robert explains these processes far more technically. As per usual, please remember to check out all of the other resources in the description. You can obtain a copy of Malcolm's Alpha and Omega Ladder to download or print on the strikefoundation.earth website, where you can also find Malcolm's other notes, references, lectures, and media. Haralick.org, where you can find out more about the work of Dr. Robert Haralick. Zaetheria, the YouTube channel of frequency scientist Sheila Raman, who we heard from in part 3 and we'll hear a little more from later in the series, and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project YouTube channel, where you can find the original live SEM EDX analysis of the thunderstorm generator that we'll cover in this video. You'll also find the link to Alpha Prospects, one of the primary commercial licensees of the thunderstorm generator, and of course the link to pre-order Roland Perry's new upcoming book Oliphant, which I've been mentioning every video, because of course I will be catching up with Roland later in the series as well, closer to the launch of the book too. This is all related. Alright, let's crack on now and talk about low energy fusion, atomic reconstruction, or as the alchemists of the past broadly referred to it, the transmutation of the elements. First of all, what is this diagram? What does it show and why is it so important? I want to set the scene properly before we journey step by step through the details. The Alpha and Omega Ladder essentially shows how through the successive fusion of 4 hydrogens to helium, and then helium again to the element at each subsequent step, degree by degree, the first 32 elements can be formed from a simple input like water, which consists of course of hydrogen and oxygen. Now we're already simplifying this process a lot in that first explanation. Hydrogen is a group, not an element. So within the hydrogen group, we have true elements such as protium and deuterium. So when we talk about hydrogens fusing to make helium on the diagram, there's actually a lot more going on even in this first step, involving the fusion of protium and deuterium, the production of light helium, and other events. But to keep things simple for now, 4 hydrogens are required to kickstart the fusion process. But we cannot simply smash 2 atoms or 4 atoms together and expect them to fuse. It requires a little more finesse. And this is one of the subjects we'll be diving deep into in this video. For now though, just to give a brief overview of the diagram first, we need only know that we can fuse 4 hydrogens together to make helium, and that this process also produces an exothermic release of energy. And this release of energy is shown in the boxes at the bottom of the diagram, denoted in mega electron volts, or MeV. And we see 26.7 mega electron volts below the little purple infinity symbol looking fellow in the bottle there. And this is the plasmoid, and we'll get back to him in a moment. So going back to this 26.7 mega electron volts, a volt is a unit of electric potential difference, and an electron volt is the energy gained by a charge of one electron passing through 1 volt. So a mega electron volt then is the energy gained by a charge of one electron passing through 1 million volts. And this is why these stepwise fusion processes have been historically or even still currently labeled as low energy nuclear reactions or cold fusion, because the reactions are not instigated by brute force bombardment with a million volts or anything like this. The energy is already there in the water and in the vacuum. It's just, it needs to be harnessed. So neither of these terms, cold fusion or low energy nuclear reactions, are entirely accurate. These reactions are not exactly what we would generally consider nuclear, nor are they cold, although the reactions, they are self-contained and implosive. So although the reaction can involve incredibly high temperatures, internally the heat does not radiate. So this energy though that's released, it's also not exactly just released. Energy in its most subtle materialized form is simply plasma, and when plasma is in a structured and coherent form, we call it a plasmoid, a self-contained toroidal or donut-shaped electromagnetic field of structured plasma, which can then be used to perform useful work, including the stepwise fusion of the subsequent elements as shown on the diagram. So this plasmoid, an atomic battery so to speak, is our clean green replacement for millions of volts. With the plasmoid, structured plasma, we can achieve the same results without brute force inputs, and this is where we get our 26.7 mega electron volts required to kickstart the stepwise chain of fusion events shown on the alpha and omega diagram. The energy is already there in the water, in the atom, but it's the plasmoid who knows how to release the genie from the bottle. Now it's important to note here that later on in this presentation I'm going to be referencing Professor Robert Haralick's lecture on water coherence domains, and essentially where Malcolm is showing the fusion of 4 hydrogens giving birth to the plasmoid here in the diagram. In Robert's explanation you'll hear about this first fusion event in terms of 2 water coherence domains, or stacks of water coherence domains, fusing together to give birth to the plasmoid. But for all intents and purposes of understanding this video, they're speaking about the same process, just in different terms, different aspects of it. But to put it very simply and conclude our broad initial overview, this diagram shows the stepwise fusion process of the first 32 elements, each step labeled with the extra energy in mega electron volts that's either released or required at each step in the fusion process, just the energy transfer that's going on here. And although the entire process could occur in the snap of your fingers, there are no big jumps. Fusion occurs step by step. Each step is like a ratchet, and we can't take one dramatic jump, even if all the energy is available at once. Everything by degrees. The alpha ladder process itself is not the invention of Malcolm Bendall or Robert Haralick. It's been known as the fusion process taking place in giant red stars since the 1950s. So it shows the series of nuclear reactions that occur in stars to produce heavier elements, most commonly observed in massive stars and during supernova. You can find out more about the history of this process in astrophysics anywhere online, so I won't go further into the history in this video. But I do encourage anyone with an interest to do a little background reading after the video and check out the equations there. A basic overview is available on Wikipedia. The omega ladder side, this is Malcolm's expansion of this existing model to include the elements which are not part of the traditional alpha ladder process and yet which are produced during these fusion reactions that we're observing. And so they should also have their own process of stepwise generation using the same method of calculation. On the omega red or positive side of the step ladder, we see this process again. It begins with the fusion of hydrogens to helium, but with one change variable. If a little more external energy is provided at the next step, then we end up with lithium, atomic number 3, rather than beryllium, atomic number 4, as on the alpha side. And from there, we return to the same process of the alpha ladder with successive helium fusions, but this time we're ascending the odd atomic numbers of the periodic table with each successive step, once again labeled with the required energy transfer in mega electron volts. Now it may be a good time to pause and explain why we're exploring this topic at all, and why Malcolm and Robert's work on applying this alpha process to the more earthbound realms of fusion is a critical discourse right now. If you found yourself watching this video, you have very likely heard of a curious little invention of Malcolm Bendall's called the thunderstorm generator. If you haven't, it would be a good time to subscribe to Alchemical Science and go after this video and check out some of my previous videos covering it. But for now, the thunderstorm generator is in simple terms a waste energy conversion system designed to be retrofitted to any existing combustion engine or carbon emission source. So this includes, but it is not limited to, installations that utilize petrol, diesel, natural gas, coal, and other carbon-based fuels. By retrofitting the thunderstorm generator to these existing technologies and integrating it into new internal combustion technologies, carbon emissions, including carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons, can be reduced to zero or a completely negligible percentage. So this is accompanied by a significant increase in oxygen, resulting in the final composition of the exhaust being similar to that of atmospheric readings of clean, fresh air. In addition to remediating the carbon exhaust emissions, the thunderstorm generator has been shown to improve the fuel consumption, so it can run for up to 65% longer under load, and this is what testing has showed. And so both of these combined functions, they're achieved not by rare metal catalysts or costly or dangerous materials, but instead by utilizing sacred geometry, Sanskrit or vortex-based mathematics, and a little known but very well supported phenomena variously termed ball lightning, plasmoids, plasmons, exotic vacuum objects, EVOs, and there's a lot of other names as well. In the case of the thunderstorm generator, these self-sustaining structured plasma entities are birthed in water, not air, and this makes all of the difference. And we call them MSART plasmoids, or water-borne plasmoids. So the obvious question that arises when we're considering the thunderstorm generator is how can we take water and carbon exhaust waste and produce oxygen? Stable transmutation of one element to another, it's not accepted nor explained in classical physics, at least not without incredibly high energy inputs involved. And yet this is exactly what's been observed here. At this point by countless scientists, research teams, industry professionals, regulative bodies, home replicators, and members of the public. But it turns out that oxygen is not all that the thunderstorm generator is producing. It is, of course, the most prominent element of interest being produced here, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. In 2023, when Malcolm first demoed his invention to scientists and the public at the Tesla Tech Extraordinary Energy Conference in the US, independent testing with a mass spectrometer conducted by chemical engineer Dr. Nikita Vovk revealed that the thunderstorm generator was producing a range of interesting elements that were not there in the inputs. And so this was trialed and confirmed again by further mass spectrometry performed at nuclear test labs in North Carolina shortly after this. We're going to talk about that test work more in later videos as well. Bob Grenier of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project then, an expert on ball lightning or plasmoid phenomena, he was asked by one of the scientists who witnessed this initial public demo to become involved and investigate the thunderstorm generator himself. And after his initial investigation, Bob supported Malcolm's claim that the thunderstorm generator was producing ball lightning or plasmoids, and he hypothesized that if they were to analyze the inside of the Vajra, the dual-nested spherical reactor of the thunderstorm generator, they would find other telltale signs of the fusion process and of ball lightning. And he was not wrong. During Bob's scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive spectroscopy, or SEM EDX, sessions that followed this, where he analyzed the samples taken from the 24-inch and 18-inch nested spheres of a thunderstorm generator, which had been previously fitted to a large natural gas-powered Caterpillar generator and run for around 500 hours. And he found all of the telltale signs of plasmoids that he'd hypothesized in abundance. And one of these telltale signs, and one that is highly relevant to our discussion today, was the discovery of pretty much every element on the periodic table up to iron, and then some beyond that. Another thing that showed up in this analysis, which I'll mention briefly, is that he found what is black diamond.
It's a string of pearls with carbon. And they're spaced that way because there must have been a standing wave. And that carbon is not ordinary carbon. That carbon is diamond.
But everyone got threatened over that at the time, so it never got published. But I am telling you now. Malcolm, Robert, myself, we've all mentioned this publicly now by this point, so if anyone has a problem with it, they can take their threats and rot in hell with them. So if you're wondering why the black diamonds are a particular taboo and apparently worth threatening people over, it's because it takes incredibly high pressures and temperatures to make diamonds from carbon, obviously. So incredibly high pressures and temperatures that a combustion engine has absolutely no hope of producing. So why are they being produced? Opens up another discussion, doesn't it? But moving away from black diamonds and continuing on. Now, of course, some of these elements found during analysis can be produced from the natural gas or the oil that was used in the generator. Some of them could be produced by the stainless steel or the Vajra, or from the materials in the engine, or, you know, plastic in the retrofit, whatever, any other parts of the whole system. But the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, they recently put their own findings to the test by analyzing a sample of an exhaust taken from another old internal combustion engine that had been run for a significant period, one which had never been retrofit with the thunderstorm generator. And in this control analysis, they found only the small range of elements that are typical to the combustion process, and none of the other telltale signs of plasmoids, such as iron crenellated spheres or pentagonal or hexagonal carbon structures that we found on the thunderstorm generator sample. So if you're thinking that perhaps all of these elements found in the original analysis of the thunderstorm generator spheres, they could just be produced by the engine or the metal of the thunderstorm generator or the fuel sources over time, or even picked up from the air or other environmental sources, this MFMP control study would suggest that this is probabilistically very unlikely or pretty much impossible. So if we can't find this rather vast array of elements in the materials being consumed or produced by the engine or the thunderstorm generator itself, where are they coming from? And the answer is, of course, water. Let's now draw on what Dr. Haralick has taught us about water in the earlier parts of this video series. So again, if you haven't seen the previous videos, don't worry, this is a good starting point anyway, and we're going to go over it all in brief. So water. Water is a two-phase liquid. Part of the volume of the water is incoherent and part of it is coherent. So the ions in the incoherent water, they obey standard electrostatic rules of interaction, so Brownian motion, which describes the random movement of microscopic particles suspended in a fluid. But we're interested in the part of the water that's in its coherent phase, or the part forming what we call coherence domains within the incoherent medium of the fluid. So a coherence domain in water is a collection of around 5 million or more water molecules in a compact volume that are all oscillating in phase within a self-entrapped magnetic field. This coherence domain is, of course, hypothesized to be toroidal, the donut shape. Robert and Malcolm are not the only ones who hypothesize this. It's agreed upon by many quantum physicists that this particular geometry is highly likely. So imagine these 5 million or so water molecules as pendulums. Put simply, the coherence domain is working the same as pendulums placed on a table. 5 million tiny electron pendulums are oscillating between higher and lower energy states in time in a predictable and phase-locked way. This is, of course, the occurrence of sympathetic resonance. But where does the initial energy to cause these coherent oscillations come from, though? What's in between the water molecules? What classical physics used to refer to as empty space. The vacuum, teeming with energy. So to explain this in simple terms, if you've ever walked around with a multimeter holding the probes in the air or sticking them in the earth or testing random objects around you, you'll notice that we're surrounded by fluctuations of energy in the millivoltage range and much lower. And we're talking about ones much lower than what we're sensing here from things like wind and, you know, static energy flying around the atmosphere. We're talking about much, much smaller, but this serves as some kind of example. So we're literally bathing in energy though, and everything is energy, and energy is everywhere. So why can't we just plug a refrigerator into the air and then utilize this energy? Well, it's because it's spread too thin over a large surface area, so to speak. So you can't easily use these vacuum fluctuations to start oscillating something big, but you can use them to start oscillating something very small, something like a water molecule or an electron. Incoherent oscillations come in phase through resonance, and we have laminar flow within the coherence domain. And we have now an energy source, coherent water, that is ready to do useful work. So once again, if you want to study these ideas in more depth, then you can go and check out parts 1 and 2 of the series, where Dr. Haralick offers an explanation of magnetic vector potential fields and electric vector potential fields, and he helps define what a field actually is in Maxwellian terms, so you may find this very helpful if you're a physicist or in that field or understand this terminology. In this video, I'm only aiming to draw an overview of all the moving parts so that everyone can follow along. So anyone who wishes to go deeper has a clear reference to find the further information. So back to our simplified explanation. We have a coherence domain in the shape of a torus. And when multiple of these toroidal coherence domains come together, so that we have two stacked tori with their 0 points or their vector magnetic potential fields in line, then one of several possible configurations will occur. These tori or fields, they can either be pointing in a clockwise or a counterclockwise direction. So if two clockwise tori come together, they stack, then they reinforce one another and they'll become more stable. If two counterclockwise tori come together, then they'll reinforce each other and they'll become more stable also. But if a counterclockwise and a clockwise tori stack together with their 0 points in line, then they'll act to cancel each other out to some extent. So two opposing forces or a standing wave. But the most stable configuration, which we want to talk about today, is when two opposing tori or stacks of tori that are all going in the same direction of tori come together side by side. So opposing direction stacks or tori, coherence domains. As we can see from this slide from Dr. Haralick, when one stack of tori is going counterclockwise and one is going clockwise and the stacks are neighboring one another, then the most stable geometry for the coherence domain is propagated. So what is about to become a greater torus, the wheel outside of the wheel. But there is one more step required to fuse the two neighboring tori together to form the one greater conjugate structure. We need to shake or agitate the liquid. So when we shake, the interface between the liquid and the air forms bubbles in the liquid. And we get a wide spectrum of bubbles, both large and small. And the larger bubbles, they simply rise to the surface and explode. They're not what we're interested in here. A bubble has polarity, of course, and the outside of the bubble is negatively charged and the inside of the bubble is positively charged. And the bubbles of interest to us here are the tiny bubbles in order of the micron scale. So the tiny bubbles, instead of expanding and rising to the surface, they remain small and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the pressure of the air increases in the bubble as its cavity grows even smaller. So eventually, when this tiny bubble does pop, the negative and positive charges meet. And typically you'll get a spark, a very small spark that can only generally be seen under certain conditions, and it's often in the ultraviolet light spectrum. And this process is water bubble cavitation. This is the principle behind the famous star in a jar experiment, or sonoluminescence, the light produced by a collapsing bubble. So when the tiny bubble cavitates, we have a discharge, rays of electric energy spread outwards from the center of the imploding structure. And we have a longitudinal wave or electric field coming between where the two tori meet. And this is what fuses the two toroidal coherence domains together. One tori is expansive, counterclockwise, and the other is contractive, clockwise. And this creates balance in the whole structure, yin and yang. And things that are balanced have different properties to things that are not balanced. Robert's words there. At 0 point, it will form at the center of the new conjugate balanced toroidal structure. And this is how an MSAT or waterborne plasmoid takes birth. So let's now take a look at Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator again to understand how this MSAT plasmoid, birthed from the coherent water, can perform incredibly useful work. The thunderstorm generator system, it consists of 3 units which are retrofit to the exhaust and the air take of, for example, an internal combustion engine, as we've mentioned. So although it is scalable and can essentially be retrofit to anything with a chimney or exhaust, including a coal power plant. But the thunderstorm generator has no moving parts and it requires no external source of power other than the existing engine itself. So the first unit is the air intake, which contains a UV bulb of a specific frequency. And this first step preconditions the air coming into the second unit, the bubbler or the plasmoid generator, to help kickstart the next part of the process. Aside from powering the UV light in the first unit of the system, the thunderstorm generator, it doesn't utilize the electrical or motive power produced by the engine to initiate this process of plasmoid generation, but instead it utilizes the measured vacuum and compression cycle strokes of the engine's pistons to agitate the water in the bubbler, reducing the surface tension between the water and the air and causing a spectrum of different sized bubbles to form in the medium, exactly as we described earlier. So the large bubbles, they rise to the surface and explode, and the smaller bubbles get smaller and smaller until they cavitate. The water coherence domains, which are naturally present in the volume of water, are fused to give birth to the MSAR plasmoid, self-sustaining, self-contained plasma entities, which have the ability to both act as a fuel source and even, as we've already touched upon, act as a catalyst for the stepwise transmutation or progressive fusion of the elements, something which has long been thought to require millions of volts or infeasibly high temperatures to do within modern mainstream academic discussion. Now, some of these fusion events may occur in the bubbler itself. As soon as the plasmoid is formed, it can feed on surrounding matter, which it can use to grow and sustain its own toroidal plasma body. And Malcolm's original hypothesis stated that the plasmoid would feed on surrounding water gases and vapor, growing its own body and leaving increased hydrogen and oxygen and hydroxides as a waste product. And indeed, the constitution of the water in the bubbler does change after the system's been run, even for a short period. The OH content rises, so the pH rises, and the water becomes lighter, which in turn increases the efficiency of plasmoid generation in the system. But the majority of the fusion process occurring in the thunderstorm generator occurs in the third unit of the system, the Vajra, the two nested sets of stainless steel spheres connected by nested tubes, which is retrofit directly to the engine's air intake and exhaust. And we've already spoken about what the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project found in their analysis of the inside of the Vajra, millions of artifacts typical of ball lightning and a spread of the first 32 elements over the surface of the sample. But let's briefly talk about the active process that's occurring to leave these artifacts and the anomalous elements behind, retroactively telling the story of the life of the plasmoid. So the two spheres at either end of the Vajra, as we've already noted, they're actually two sets of three spheres nested inside one another, like Russian dolls. And in the smallest iteration of this device, the outer sphere is 4 inches in diameter, the middle sphere is 3 inches in diameter, and the innermost sphere is 2 inches in diameter. And it's the 4:3:2 ratio that is important here, which we'll talk about in other videos and maybe a little bit later. But the device can be scaled to any size, essentially. You just got to keep this ratio. So for example, the standard larger model contains 24-inch, 18-inch, or 12-inch spheres. Anyway, these two sets of nested spheres are connected together by a set of nested tubes, and the outer tube connects the two 4-inch spheres together, and the inner tube, generally half the diameter of the outer or an octave lower, connects the two 3-inch spheres together. So the transitions between the tubes and the pipes are at a 51.84 degree angle, and this is the same as the slope to base angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're going to talk a little bit more about this number and angle later. The center of the 2-inch spheres are simply here to act as flow guides, and their cavities are closed and not connected together at all. So they're just sitting there with little support struts holding them there. So this creates two cavities within the Vajra. The exhaust output from the engine flows in a counterclockwise vortex into the cavity between the 4-inch and 3-inch spheres at the top of the device, through the outer cavity between the nested tubes, and then it continues its counterclockwise spiral between the 4-inch and 3-inch spheres at the bottom of the device and out of the new final exhaust of the Vajra. The other inner cavity, the one between the 3-inch and 2-inch spheres, this is for the air intake. And in this case, the plasmoids, water vapor, and other elements, which make up what we generally refer to as the cold stream of the thunderstorm generator, are vacuumed in a clockwise vortex up through the inner cavity between the 3 and 2-inch southern set of spheres, up through the inner nested tube, and through the inner cavity of the top set of nested spheres. And from here, the cold stream flows through into the engine through a spacer block, which is added just after the carburetor. And so this replaces the majority of the engine's normal air intake. But back to the Vajra, the counterclockwise spiraling exhaust stream and the clockwise spiraling plasmoid and cold air intake are physically separated from each other by the stainless steel wall of the 3-inch spheres and their connecting tube. So the streams are not able to touch. They're not being blasted at one another, but rather the cold vortex flows cleanly through the center of the hot vortex, sealed within their own nested cavities. So this is where the first little bit of magic happens. Plasma, the so-called fourth state of matter, really the first state of matter, it doesn't really care much about physical barriers. Plasmoids are not just balanced in their form, but balancing is also their function. So the plasmoid is nature's equalizing force. It is conscious and independent and can be influenced by consciousness or communicated with. However, unless it's otherwise intentionally influenced, it will essentially always just act of a greater hive mind, so to speak. It'll attempt to keep homeostasis within the system that it's contained in. In the thunderstorm generator, we've created a really extreme differential. The hot exhaust gas, positively charged and high temperature in the outer cavity, and the cold air and plasmoid stream in the inner cavity, clockwise and contracting. And perhaps you can see now why the thunderstorm generator is named as such. It acts as a thunderstorm does in more ways than one. The plasmoids, they discharge themselves between the outer wall of the 3-inch sphere and the inner wall of the 4-inch sphere, attempting to equalize the extreme differential of temperature and charge between the two counter-opposing vortexes flowing through the device. And this occurs exactly as natural lightning does, really. When the Earth becomes overcharged and the balance between our planet and its atmosphere reaches a critical extreme, then plasmoids form an ionized path between the Earth and the atmosphere, and the Earth discharges through this ionized pathway, and equilibrium is restored within the system. So although we're not able to see what the stainless steel spheres of the Vajra look like inside, if we could, it would look something like a Tesla globe. The plasmoids arcing in long, worm-like opposing vortex structures between the 3-inch and 4-inch sphere walls in a constant attempt to maintain equilibrium between the thunderstorm of opposing forces flowing continuously through. So we see the remnants of this activity in MFMP's analysis of the inside of the outside 4-inch sphere and the outside of the inside 3-inch sphere, these polygonal pockmark structures showing the impact zone of the plasmoids. So when the thunderstorm generator system has been intentionally overcharged in experimental trials, you can even see the plasmoids arcing outside and then back into the 4-inch sphere, as shown in this footage here. But generally they're self-contained in the system unless you're intentionally overcharging it. So let's jump forward for a moment now and take a look at the typical exhaust analysis comparison between a control generator and the generator which was retrofit with the thunderstorm generator. So we can see that the exhaust composition of the control generator, it consists of a high percentage of various carbon-based compounds, so carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, while the exhaust composition of the generator retrofit with the thunderstorm generator, it contains very little carbon at all, and a far higher percentage of oxygen, up to 21%, which is around what we would typically measure in clean, fresh air. So where does the carbon go and where does the oxygen come from? The carbon doesn't simply become oxygen, and we know this because of the vast array of other residual elements and artifacts found in the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project analysis of the spheres. So back to the Vajra, acting like a Tesla globe with plasmoids arcing between the 3-inch and 4-inch spheres, crossing the span of the cavity through which the exhaust gases flow in its counterclockwise spiral. We know that the plasmoids, they contain a 0 point at the center of their toroidal form. And when the carbon exhaust waste passes through these 0 points, this is where the magic happens and the transmutation or atomic reconstruction events take place. Initially, it had been hypothesized that the helium was simply fusing with the carbon to create oxygen, but when Dr. Haralick actually calculated this, he discovered that if this was the case, we would see closer to 30% oxygen in the final exhaust gas composition. So this is unlikely to be the primary cause of the increased oxygen. His new hypothesis, it accounts for this actual measurement, the 21% or slightly less or slightly more of the increased oxygen observed in the exhaust gas analysis. So instead, the CO2 is disassociated into carbon and oxygen, and the H2O is partially disassociated into hydrogen and oxygen too. The hydrogens fuse to make helium, and some carbon goes through a fission process to make helium, so 3 heliums equals a carbon. The carbon, it fuses with 2 heliums to make neon, so the output is likely to be primarily oxygen, nitrogen, and neon, and of course they haven't been measuring with neon, and this is something that Robert's going to confirm to carry this hypothesis forward or adjust it. There are, of course, multiple pathways and possibilities here. This is only one of them that he is currently involved in testing. But from this, we can ascertain that the extra oxygen likely primarily or entirely comes from the disassociated CO2, H2O, and other oxides. Essentially, we're recovering the oxygen that was already part of the air that was coming initially into the engine through the air intake. That oxygen was always there, it was just bonded with other elements by this point. So the plasmoids cause it to split apart again, become free. Not that transmutation isn't happening, we can clearly see that it is, but this explains the huge increase in oxygen, why we see this as something that is being produced in a far more dramatic way than the smaller amounts of various elements that we find on the inside of the spheres. To understand this process properly, we must shift our perspective a little. So far, we've been speaking about the elements as though they're disparate little balls full of smaller little balls that we call protons and electrons, all doing their thing. And this is useful language in terms of simple calculation and the practical side of chemistry and engineering. It's necessary. But in physics, thinking about things in terms of particles, it really only serves to obscure the more fundamental properties underlying the interactions of and the state changes of matter. So transmutation of the elements is much easier to understand when we consider an element in terms of its frequency. We live in an etheric medium, a musical and harmonic medium whose fractal parts bubble with life, forming coherent field perturbations, just as our coherence domains form and give birth to plasmoids in the bubbler of the thunderstorm generator. If we consider everything in terms of frequency, as Nikola Tesla so famously suggested, I've said it 100 times, if we consider all elements as stable temporary perturbations or state changes of the unified medium of the ether, then it's far simpler to conceive how one seemingly disparate particle can become a different kind of seemingly disparate particle. But where to start? How do we know what the frequency of an element is, and how do we start thinking about things in these terms? So again, we will refer to the work of Dr. Haralick, who has collated the existing constants and equations necessary to calculate the frequency of an element empirically from its atomic weight. So a number which we can easily find readily available for every element. He's then formalized this process as follows. Okay, so calculating the frequency of the elements. I made up these slides with Robert in London last year, so he went through the process with me. And it looks a little complex, but it's actually very, very simple. So a unique frequency can be associated with any element or ion or molecule by using the Einstein energy mass equivalence relation. This is, of course, E equals mc squared. So defining those, E equals energy in joules, m equals mass in kilograms, and this is the mass of the atom that we're going to be talking about here. C equals the speed of light in meters per second, squared, of course. All right, so we have E equals mc squared. E also equals hf. H is the Planck's constant, and F is frequency in this case. We want to find out the frequency, so we need to move this equation around a little bit to get what we want. Hf equals mc squared. So the Planck's constant times frequency equals the mass of the atom times the speed of light squared. If we shuffle this around again, we really get what we want here, which is the frequency equals mc squared over h. So frequency equals the mass of the atom times the speed of light in meters per second squared divided by Planck's constant. That's what we're looking for here to find out the frequency of an element. So let's go through that step by step. Determining the mass of one atom first. So we start out with the atomic weight of an atom. We can find this anywhere, easily accessible. And then we use something called Avogadro's number, which we see defined here as Na, and Na equals 6.022, etc., times 10 to the power of 3. So that's defined there already. We use this to get the mass in grams from the atomic weight. So after we've done this, we divide the mass in grams by 1000 to get the mass in kilograms, and this is the number that we need. So we can see that written out here. M equals atomic weight divided by 1000 times Avogadro's number. So next step in the process, determining the energy of one atom. So we've got the speed of light defined here, C equals 2. I'll let you read the rest. When the mass of a single atom is converted to energy E, then the energy will be, and we have the equation here. So energy equals atomic weight divided by 1000 times Avogadro's number, and then times the speed of light squared. And then we see that equation solved below. All right, so now that we have the energy in joules, we can determine the frequency. So there's another relation called the Einstein-Planck relation, which relates energy E of a photon to the frequency F at which the photon is oscillating. So that's what we're working out here. Of course, frequency equals energy over the Planck's constant, and the Planck's constant is defined there as 6.62, and I'll let you read the rest as usual. I hate these bloody numbers. And so the final equation here, frequency equals the atomic weight times the energy in joules divided by Planck's constant, and we get the final answer in hertz here. All right, so to consolidate this process, when Robert was teaching me, he just gave me this example using the calcium atom. So determining the mass of a calcium atom, our first step from its atomic weight. And we want to see, again, we see the equation here. So to determine the mass of the calcium ion in grams, we have to divide its atomic weight by Avogadro's number, which is written here again. And then we divide that by 1000 to get its mass in kilograms. So that's the first step. So then we change the mass to energy. We've got to find out the energy in joules. And remember, energy equals the mass of the atom times the speed of light squared. And we see that equation solved there to find the energy in joules. And so then finally, we come again to F equals E over H. Frequency equals E or mc squared over H. So we see that for the calcium atom solved here, and the answer in hertz down the bottom. And that's all there is to it. It looks a little complex from the outset if you're not used to algebra, but there's a simple process to go from the atomic weight to the frequency. And this is how we do it, using the conventional constants and equations. Okay, and here are the calculated frequencies of the elements according to Dr. Harlick's calculations. He lists both the actual calculated frequency and also the frequency brought down by 73 octaves. Now, I'm going to leave our exploration of frequency of the elements here for this video, but there's a very good reason why Robert has listed each element lowered by 73 octaves, as well as the original figure, and he talks about this in his lectures, as does Sheila Rahman. The note A will sound like the note A, whether it's played in the first octave or the 100th octave. Obviously, we can't hear the 100th octave, but take that as example as you will. So if we bring the numbers down into a realm where we can more easily explore their relations, their harmonics, then we may find that the musical fractal universe around us is simultaneously far more mysterious than we could have possibly imagined, and not so mysterious at all. We are going to dive right into the topic of Pythagorean tuning and how it relates to the elements in the future parts of the Alpha and Omega ladder series, including my upcoming interview following up with frequency scientist Sheila Rahman, who has mapped Robert's frequencies of the elements to a keyboard and her virtual oscilloscope so that we can better explore their relations audibly and visually. And let us not forget about Malcolm's plasmoid unification model. It's been a while since we've touched on this subject, but we are heading back towards it degree by degree. It takes a while to get there. For now though, let's go back to Malcolm's Alpha and Omega ladder diagram and summarize again, now that we've been through the entire process behind it in detail and explained it in practical application within the thunderstorm generator. So two hydrogens, or water coherence domains, are fused via the spark generated through water bubble cavitation. Energy is released during this fusion reaction, but this energy becomes part of the self-entrapped field of the plasmoid. The plasmoid then provides the energy necessary for subsequent fusion reactions. And if you've got this far through the video, you must be a seeker, so we'll leave the realms of conventional mathematics for a moment, and we'll briefly move into the far more ancient and natural language of our universe, Sanskrit or vortex-based maths. Malcolm's explanation of what's actually happening is that the two opposing spin hydrogens, or two coherence domains, they fuse when they meet at a 51.84 degree angle to one another. Of course, they have polarity. This is where we get the angle from. 51.84 or 5184. This is a very interesting number. NASA scientist Ed Grimm found during his experiments with turbines that 51.84 degree angle, it provided the least resistance. And this is also the angle that Malcolm has used in the transitions between the spheres and the tubes of the thunderstorm generator for the same reasons as we've already mentioned. But let's think outside of modern technology for a moment. The slope to base angle of the Great Pyramid is 51.84 degrees. There are 51,840,000 arc seconds in one day, or 24 hours. There are 25,920 years in the great year of our solar system, half of 51,840 years. The moon, it travels 51,840 miles around the Earth in 24 hours. There are 518,400 arc seconds in the 6 days of creation in the Bible. And the melting point of hydrogen, or more specifically protium, is negative 259.2 degrees Celsius, double negative 518.4. All I'm trying to say here is that once you find the Philosopher's Stone, the ocean, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And what seems like the end of the greatest mystery is just the beginning of an even greater one. And if you found this video and this channel, I don't know how we all got here, but we have become a part of the search for the Holy Grail, the true Holy Grail spoken of by all the great initiates and alchemists of the past. Transmutation, time dilation, production of energy, these are all just the signposts that we find along the way, along the journey. So please help share what I've shared today. The entire world needs to take up this search for the Grail, like their lives depend on it, because they do. Stay tuned to hear more things that you probably won't hear many places else. This is Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan Colin, and a special thanks to Malcolm Bendel, Dr. Robert Harlick, and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, all of whom I have referenced during this video. Thank you and good night.